are Jason, Jarrell, and Marcia K Moore. Very excited to have them on tonight. Marcia K Moore is a digital artist who recreates 3D sculptures, reconstruction, interpretations of the elongated skulls. Most of her work has been based off of the ancient Paracus, who lived 2,000 years off of the coast of Peru. Other anomalies she has been constructing includes the North American giants. And her website is marciakmore.com. And check those out. They're amazing. And Jason Jarrell has been studying prehistoric civilizations and the Nephilim for 17 years. During the last 6 years, he and his wife Sarah have been involved in an independent investigation of the Adena culture of North American mound builders. Over the course of their research, they have studied over 100 years of literature, including archaeological reports from North America, Europe, and the ancient East, as well as the writings of 19th century antiquarians. Their work also involves investigations of lost or forgotten archaeological sites in Ohio, Kentucky, and the Kanawha Valley of the West Virginia. And their conclusions are the gigantic skeletons connected with a colonizing Indo-European culture, which were discovered well over 100 years ago in the United States and subsequently concealed by a powerful transnational force. Sarah and Jason have published articles with the Ancient Origins website and Ancient American magazine, AlleghenyMounds.com. And please welcome Marcia and Jason to the show this evening. Hello.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to have both of you on at one time. This is great. And Marcia, I know I'm going to keep saying Marcia. I apologize for that. Marcia.
No, that's okay. That's okay. No problem.
It's wonderful to have you on. So tell me what's going on. Let's give everybody a rundown. What are you working on?
Well, I'll let Marcia start with that.
Well, Jason and I have been collaborating and working very diligently on reconstructing a lot of these mound builders, the giants. So that's what I've been doing. And I have been working on Adena and Hopewell and also taking it out into other parts of the world as well. So nothing is going to be seen for a while, but I'll probably on my social networking like Facebook give little teasers, so to speak, just so people can kind of connect with it. But that's what I've been doing.
Excellent and incredible. I'm posting your links in the chat room here as I speak. And I don't know if you want to talk about your project and the possible book. Do you want to give everybody a teaser now, or do you want to talk about that later?
Go ahead,
well, I could talk about that some. The first Adena giant recreation that we worked on with Marcia has been released in the latest issue of Ancient American magazine. There's a double-page spread of the giant, and it's also been released in an article with Ancient Origins online, so people can actually see one of these giants now. And one thing that I want to say about that reconstruction is that the skeletal material that was used to come up with the dimensions for the reconstruction comes from a manuscript from the Smithsonian's own vault of an excavation in 1883 of a burial mound in Charleston, West Virginia. And the burial was described by the Smithsonian's own excavator, Colonel Norris, as 7'6" with 19 inches between the coaxial cable of the shoulder blades. And this description actually matched a large number of the gigantic skeletons that have been found in burial mounds that were mentioned in newspaper accounts and county histories in the 1800s and early 1900s. So we went with those dimensions for the recreation, the first Adena recreation. And for the face and the head of the Adena, we actually sent Marcia several photographs that were published by William S. Webb and Charles Snow in 1945 of an actual Adena skull from the Wright Mounds in Kentucky. So that the face and the head on that Adena is based on an actual skull that she had photographic evidence of. And it's very interesting because the skeletal material from the Wright Mounds in Kentucky, where the skull came from, was described by H.T. Hertzberg as having congenital cranial height that was only heightened with artificial means. And what that means is that even though these people probably practiced a form of artificial cranial deformation, their crania were already significantly high vaulted.
Interesting. That's very, very interesting right there. And when you create and reconstruct these images, what comes to mind for you? Do you see that there's something there that's almost like perhaps not necessarily connected to what we would call as a human species, maybe an off-world species?
Is that question for me?
Yes. I'm sorry, Marcia. Yeah, either. Actually, both of you. I'd like to hear both of your opinions on that. Go ahead, Marcia.
Well, when I'm reconstructing, and I need to tell everyone I am a traditional artist and digital artist, and I have no forensic training, but I can visualize, and it's very easy to, if you know anatomy, to visualize what these skulls look like, reconstruct it. And essentially, it is an interpretation, but I believe it's at least giving people a visual of what these people may have looked like, these giants. So when I'm looking at these skulls, it's an obvious to me that the cranial area is misshapen compared to the human form. And when I'm creating these, I'm using a software program, a 3D software program, where I can look at the skull as I'm sculpting full circle. So I'm always bouncing back and forth from the illustration and then also sculpting at the same time. So for me, it's a constant, it's an interpretation for me, but yet it just kind of flows through me. So I'm very much interested in, and have been interested in, the native communities and native peoples of this country and the world, and I have a minor in anthropology, and so I know about the mound complexes, and this is just wonderful to get all the research that's going on with Jason. It's phenomenal research. I applaud him.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, and both of you actually. And Jason, do you have any insight in that as well? Any comment?
Oh, sure. When we began the research that my wife and I have been working on for the last 6 years, going on 7 years, we promised a good friend of ours that we would follow the evidence wherever the evidence led. And one thing I can say that I'm confident of is these beings were all over the Western world. And in terms of who do we think they were, or what were they, we do have some theories that we're planning on putting in the book that's coming out. And these theories were really formulated by the research. We started with kind of a blank slate. And what we ended up doing was tracing the tendency to construct certain types of earthworks and burial mounds throughout human history back to what we believe is the point of origin. And in doing that, we began to notice that several major historical upheavals going all the way through the prehistoric period were connected with people who would have lived amongst these giants. And a big part of the work we're doing in terms of the writing is attempting to restore these beings to world history. And Marcia is working on creating a visual representation of that history so that when you read the work that we're planning on doing, you'll actually see representations of these giants placed into the cultural and historical context of the culture they would have existed in at the time, as well as an accurate dating for when they would have been alive. So we're really working on reconstructing a greater prehistoric reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you certainly are, and it's incredible. And I strongly suggest everybody check out these images. They're fascinating. To me, I was wondering if there was any correlation, or if you saw any correlation to the ant people, because it seems to me like some of these designs, some of these images remind me of the ant people to some degree, kind of an alien species. It's just the way their skull looks, and especially the female giants. Any comment on that?
Well, if you're referring to the ant people from some of the stories of the natives from the western region, it's become our opinion, even though most of our research is centered on Mesopotamia and Europe and the East Coast, it's become our belief over the last few years that maybe there are various expressions of the human genome and maybe even of species that we're unaware of that have existed in the past but which are obfuscated by the establishment today.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I did notice how muscular a lot of these giants were. So obviously, and when you look them in retrospect, insofar as looking at regular humanoids, so to speak, opposed to them, I mean, you're talking very big, athletic, muscular giants.
That's right. Marcia has a great interpretive skill with being able to determine through her intuition what a person looks like if you examine the crania. And the musculature of the giants was commented upon by Don Dragoo of the Carnegie Museum, who wrote extensively about the remains of these types of beings in Mounds for the Dead. And he actually described the bones as having marked eminences where the muscles were attached. So it's well known, or at least was once well known, in anthropology in North America that these beings were extremely powerful physically.
Yeah, they certainly look that way. There's no doubt about it. And what kind of... Go ahead.
Just briefly, when you see the skull and you see the size of the skull and the robustness of everything about that skull, the jawline, the cheeks, the chin, it's obvious that these individuals were quite strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't want to run into one in a dark alley. There's no doubt about that. And some of them actually look kind of Native American to me. So once again, it looks like they're almost the Native Americans could be a descendant of some of these, correct?
Well, certainly there would have been a lot of Native Americans who would carry some of the genes of these people, and even a lot of the historic tribes that were encountered by the early European colonists still had very large people among them. And I think that Marcia has actually done some recent research on cranial deformation up to the present day in North America. Yes,
absolutely. Just got back. Well, it's been a couple of months, but I was over on Vancouver Island, and a wonderful First Nations family invited me to see their old village and to see the head binding that took place up there. And they were the only group, the Quatsino were the only group that had headbound up in that area. And it's interesting to see how and why this is happening. They didn't have a lot of information other than it was the elite class that usually deformed the skull, and it was mostly the women. And there were some ideas as to why that might have happened, but I'm not going to reveal those right now. And when you see what they're talking about, and then you see the giants, there is definitely a strong similarity. There's something that they're emulating, and they've gotten this from probably these mound builders and other elongated skulls throughout the world. So it's interesting, very interesting.
Oh, it certainly is. Did you have something to add, Jason?
Well, I just wanted to say that in terms of the anthropology, the central physical type of what we call the Adena people, that's certainly probably not anything remotely like what they called themselves, but the physical type of the Adena people has actually been associated with gigantic skeletons from around the world, and specifically I'm referring to their cranial type and their jawbone, which was enormous. But in terms of the cranial deformation, Marcia mentioned the females, and according to the research that we've been doing, we've been reanalyzing all of the anthropological data from the 20th century that was documented for Adena mounds in Kentucky and Ohio. And there are a surprising number of mounds which had female elite. And actually, one of those mounds was at the Wright Mound in Kentucky. Most of the burials with the most prestigious grave goods were of females, and the anthropologists who studied at the time concluded that this chiefdom may have been passing the torch down from one generation to the next by the females, as opposed to mounds in West Virginia, where most of the elite burials were strictly males in some cases. So the research that she's done on the female head binding certainly has a precedent in these ancient cultures.
Mm-hmm. It certainly does. What about hair texture and color? What kind of record do we have of that?
There's actually no record that we have for the prehistoric Adena in terms of skin pigmentation or anything of that nature. We do know that they were extremely large compared to most of the rest of the Native American population, and I don't just mean the giants. For example, there's an illustration of just an Adena of average height skull in the Adena People number 2 by Webb and Snow, and it's positioned right next to a Fort Ancient skull. And the Adena, who's a normal-sized Adena, is actually a third larger than the Fort Ancient skull. So even the basic population was of larger proportions than their contemporaries.
Right, exactly. Do you have any comment there, Marcia?
No
Okay.
comment there.
Great. And what kind of feedback have you received thus far from academia, or any kind of feedback regarding your three-dimensional images of these giants?
Actually, it's been quite positive. There's no one out there that's doing this. So,
right. Yeah.
I'm not there's millions of artists out there that are probably much stronger at this than I am, but no one is doing this. So it just seemed like a responsibility to reconstruct the past, to kind of present the future. So taking on the Paracus down in Peru, I have reconstructed quite a few of those skulls that Brian Forrester is researching. And it just, here living in America, I was like, I'm right here. This needs to be talked about. This needs to be shown to the world. So our own people need to see this. So that's why I'm reconstructing. We need to present this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I'm very grateful you're doing this. It's interesting. We're in the illusion of 2015. You think somebody would have done this already, yet they haven't. So once again, I applaud you for doing this, Marcia.
Thank you. I'll keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason, you have any comment there?
Well, I think that I find it very interesting that no one's ever attempted to do this on the level that Marcia's done. I mean, granted, a lot of people believe today that these skeletons were errors in measurement, or the most popular explanation, the one that the Smithsonian typically will share with you if you were to contact them right now on the issue, is that these skeletons were disarticulated, and that people simply over-speculated the height because the bones were scattered or the bones were pressed out of shape in the tombs. However, the skeleton that we used for the reconstruction is described in this manuscript by the gentleman who excavated the skeleton as being wrapped in bark and then encased in clay. This skeleton was certainly not disarticulated. It was not an error in measurement. The excavator was a colonel in the U.S. Army. I'm sure he could measure a human skeleton. So there's probably been a certain degree of reluctance to recreate an actual Adena of this type. There have been several attempts in the past to recreate an Adena image. Webb and Snow featured an image of Adena in the Adena people #2, and it was just a sketch. But that sketch simply did not do the skulls we were studying justice. We could tell immediately upon seeing it that it was not accurate, particularly with the front of the lower jaw, which was enormous. So it may be that a lot of people in academia have just been reluctant to do an accurate recreation, even of the cranial proportions.
Correct. Yeah. Well, it's a censorship too. When you think about it, we've talked about this before, how there's been a lot of quote unquote censorship, and it seems to me like they're avoiding our quote unquote heritage insofar as what's really been here and buried for a very long time.
Yes, there is a greater prehistoric reality that has been obfuscated by the establishment. And when I say that, I'm not suggesting that everyone who's involved in archaeology or history is a willing accomplice, but the controls that were put in place by academia right around 1900 function as a self-regulating system, and it regulates out anything which is outside of certain parameters. And one example of how that works is peer review. If a mainstream archaeologist were to publish a paper today that acknowledged that among the elite of the Adena culture, there was a consistent group of people who were 7, 8, or even 9 feet tall, that person would be ravaged in peer review. And that peer review is very important. So it falls to the amateur, and it falls to people outside the establishment to attempt to piece prehistory back together.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And once again, like I said, I applaud you all for doing the work that you're doing, because nobody else is doing it right now. And I think eventually maybe they will get their courage together, but who knows? There is a question for you here, Marcia. Some of Marcia's artwork looks like some of the faces of a pigment on them. Was that a characteristic ritual activity? That's the question.
Pigment on them.
Like as in blue skin?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, some of the interpretations that I've created for Brian's research with the elongated skulls down in Peru, there is a little indication that there might be some blue pigment, or, we're always finding out that there's a lot of ochre and yellows and reds and blues that are a part of burials, and possibly face paint. So these are interpretations. So I'm trying to open the mind to possibility, even if it's not an totally accurate visual.
I think you really bring them to life on so many different levels. It's quite fascinating to observe these images, in my opinion. I really enjoy it. So
one thing that I love about Marcia's work is you can study those images and you can get a real impression that there was some social sophistication among these prehistoric peoples. These were not merely hunter-gatherers who didn't know where their next meal was coming from. These people built temples. In the case of Peru, they built megalithic temples. In North America, they filled the entire face of the Ohio River Valley with earthworks, some of which were megalithic. So there had to have been an intense social sophistication that existed in prehistory that has been denied. And I think that really comes out with her imagery.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I certainly do as well. Now, with the mounds themselves, is this where the giants were actually buried?
Well, the giants were buried in a number of different ways. Predominantly, they've been found burial mounds. The interesting thing about the burial mounds is that the giants that are found in burial mounds, the accounts that we've been able to verify are usually somewhere between 7 and 8 feet tall, with an occasional discovery that reaches between 8 or 9 feet tall. But the historical record states that in other types of burials, even larger individuals were found, and these are usually in subsurface tombs. And a big part of the research we've done for the book is we've studied the artifacts when the information's available that have been found with these gigantic individuals of all sizes, and we've attempted to restore them to their cultural context. And what has begun to surface in our work is that the accounts of the extremely large individuals, like some from Kentucky and Wisconsin, which are anywhere between 9 and 11 feet tall, the artifacts and the types of graves that we've studied that they're found in fall into an earlier period than the Adena giants. So there may be some evidence there for an even larger group of individuals who bred down with certain elements of the population. And eventually, over time, they may have grown smaller.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, that's very interesting. Do you have any feedback on that, Marcia?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I am solely the reconstruction girl. I definitely, all of Jason and Sarah's work and Brian's work and all these hardworking researchers, I learned from them. And the work that I'm doing, a lot as an artist, a majority of the work, what you recreate really kind of comes through you. And then when you have all of this research to kind of balance that, it's amazing what you can create, and it's amazing how accurate I think it might be as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I certainly get that vibration when I look at those images, that there's a lot of accuracy in there. So that's very interesting. Can they excavate it all around these mounds, or is it sacred ground where it's not to be accessed?
Well, that largely depends on what state you're in.
Okay.
The archaeologists in most of North America have a monopoly on excavation. In Iowa, there's a law against any type of excavation where there could be burials, so archaeology is completely lost at this point in Iowa. And that's very unfortunate, because even the archaeologists, which I've been in contact with several archaeologists in Iowa, it is very well known that the oldest mound and earthworks building cultures in the eastern United States still have traces in Iowa, but they unfortunately cannot be excavated. So the laws do vary from state to state. The excavations that have been undertaken by the Smithsonian in the late 1800s, they were, for all intents and purposes, they were very poorly done. Most of the time, the excavating agents simply drilled in from the top of a mound all the way to the bottom, and they simply recorded what they found. And in many instances, the notebooks and the diaries that were turned into the Smithsonian hierarchy were edited, and any discoveries which were too uncomfortable were actually removed from print. So a lot of knowledge has actually been lost.
Mm-hmm. That's a shame. No doubt about that.
Well,
go ahead.
I know that that's a strong thing to say, but the only reason I say it is we have several manuscripts from the Smithsonian vault, and you can actually see the X's drawn through certain passages, and you can compare the manuscript with the printed version and see the differences.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it sounds like it was censored versus edited, right? Makes you wonder.
Well, that's entirely possible.
Yeah.
For example, near Charleston, West Virginia, there's a description of a gorget that's found in a burial mound, and in the manuscript it's mentioned as having some type of rude inscription on one side, and in the printed version that's completely removed.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting right there. Do you travel a lot, Jason? Do you travel at all to other mounds and other sacred sites?
We've been all over the state of West Virginia, and we've actually rediscovered a couple of sites that haven't been seen for a very long time. This past summer, we rediscovered a site that hadn't been visited since 1976 and had only been reported with a brief 2-page article, and we completely surveyed and photographed the site and even discovered 2 petroglyph sites. We travel we've done work in the Big Sandy Valley between West Virginia and Kentucky, and we've also surveyed some earthworks in Ohio. So we do get around.
Oh, that's so nice. I was wondering, you know what I'd like to see you and Sarah do? And of course, it would be really interesting if you ever went over to Hawaii and actually checked it out to see if there were actually any remnant of a giant civilization there.
Where did you say?
To the Hawaiian Islands, just to see if there's any kind of correlation. They have a lot of
certainly.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're interested in studying everywhere. Basically, the scale of the civilization that we're talking about, it's much larger than most people realize. We're talking about by 3,000 years ago, a civilization that stretched from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up into Canada around the Great Lakes, and then out to the Atlantic coast. And this persevered for thousands of years, and the traditions and the earthworks persevered for thousands of years and went through several incarnations. So there's such a rich history here and such a strong presence that at this point we don't believe anyone actually knows the furthest extent that these people were building.
I agree. Yeah, there's so many things. There's so many levels to it. You have to ask yourself, really, what was the purpose behind it all? Obviously, we mentioned burial sites, sacred sites for burials and ceremonial, but really, what were they trying to establish, in your opinion?
Well, my opinion is a lot of my opinion is shaped by archaeology. I realize these are fantastic subjects to talk about, and they're extraordinary, and I know that people have seen a lot of books documenting the hundreds of giants that were reported for about 150 years, but most of our sources, in fact, 95% of our sources are mainstream archaeology. And just by the mainstream archaeology and the anthropology that we've studied, we can piece together a certain degree of the society that existed here at the time that these people lived. And the type of social model that they propagated is called a political economy. And essentially what we're talking about is a small group of people controlled the entire economic system of the country. For example, they circulated prestigious goods to people that served a function. If that function was to circulate and mine copper, you may wear a certain prestige good to represent your place in society. And the ultimate goal seems to have been absolute economic control. They were controlling the distribution of vital resources. They were controlling the distribution of prestigious goods. And by creating a ceremonial system as prevalent as the one that they did, they may have been able to use spirituality as a way to convince people to participate in that system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense right there. And we have a few questions for you here for both of you. Actually, I guess it would be more for Jason, but let's see here. Ask about the meanings of the beehive huts found in the mounds.
Well, the beehive huts are actually clay vaults that were beehive-shaped, and these are found in some of the earliest Adena mounds. One of those sites is at the Dover Mound in Kentucky, and the upper burial in the Dover Mound was put on record by William S. Webb from the University of Kentucky in his report on the Dover Mound as a 7-foot-tall giant. And that burial was actually radiocarbon dated to sometime between 800 and 700 BC. And at the bottom of the Dover Mound were a series of these clay beehive vaults. And it was generally thought at the time that the lowest section of the mound was older than the burial that was dated near the mound's top. So these are considered a very old practice, the building of these clay beehive vaults. They were also found in several mounds at Charleston, West Virginia, and in most of the mounds that they were found in, there were also giants. So what's interesting is, in the Smithsonian manuscript, some of these vaults had traces of corn in them. Well, this culture is 4,000 to 3,000 years old, and there's corn the traces of corn is found in some of these clay vaults in these mounds still preserved, that would change the dating for when maize was used in North America.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's pretty interesting. Do you have any comment, Marcia?
I just learned something every time I listen to this man. So,
I did too.
As far as traveling, if I could just kind of pick up on that one, I travel whenever it presents itself. But, you know, I'm over here in Florida, and one of the main reasons that what got me into reconstruction was was in the process of creating an ancient story about Florida and its peoples prior to the Spanish. And all of these, through studying some of the ancient cultures, like the Calusa Indians down here on the Gulf Coast, it just created these little side trails, and it led me to Peru, and it led me up to these mound builders. And here down in Florida, you have middens and these shell middens that are built just like these mound complexes up north. And also, there's plenty of mound complexes down here in Florida. So it's interesting. This nation is interesting. It's everywhere, and it's quite diverse. And that's what kept me here in this part of the world. And I'm very curious as to when everyone's going to open their heads to this and start really waking up to all of this, because it's right in front of our faces. And I don't want to carry on much about that, but one of the reasons why I'm recreating all of this work is so people can visually get a glimpse as to what was around them and what they're not receiving in the school system, what they're not being taught. You know, Jason talked about Iowa and the laws. I'm from Iowa. And I know he was talking in particular about I have a Native American adopted mother. She's Yankton Sioux, and she actually started NAGPRA, which is the repatriation of bones. And the reason that she did that was her husband was an engineer, and he came home one day, and he said that they had unearthed a cemetery, and in that cemetery they had an archaeologist come, and the archaeologist determined that the bones of 18 individuals were Anglo, and then there was a Native American mother and child, and they reburied the Anglo bones, and they boxed up the Native bones and sent it to the Smithsonian Institution. And needless to say, she was livid. She is no longer with us, but I think that she would be totally supportive of what's taking place as far as what we're trying to do with this research and how we're trying to open the minds of everyone to understand this. It's right in front of our face. It has been. This could change everything. This could change the way all the cultures here in the United States treat each other, all of the races treat each other. If we can get on the same page, then we can move forward. If we can't do that, then we're going to just spin, and we're going to just keep that spinning cycle continuously.
That's a good point you make right there. Yeah, it is hidden in plain sight. There's no doubt about it. And I was going to ask, how deep are these mounds now? Are they built from the floor up, or the dirt up, or they go down underneath? Are there caverns?
Well, there are a rich variety of burial mounds in North America, but with regards to the Adena, we have several types. There are mounds with subsurface pits, and in the earlier phase, these pits would simply be pits, earthen pits. In later phases, these pits would have very, very elaborately built wooden vaults. And these vaults, at certain times, the Adena would add subsequent vaults as they increase the height of the mound over time. And then there's a very rare species of Adena mound, and 3 of the mounds which had this type of tomb were actually here in Charleston where we live, which is essentially an entire log cabin built inside of a mound on the surface. Wow. Now, some Adena mounds featured stone kists these are basically stone coffins, and there's at least one from Charleston which featured a kist so large that if it was found anywhere else in the world, it would have been called a dolmen. So there's rich variety, and the variety is actually a problem because the archaeologists can't cope with the diversity of the Adena culture, and that's why today the overall overriding trend is to deny that this culture even existed as anything other than a precursor to the later Hopewell. So I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it certainly does. And I just have one more question. What about tunnels? Were there any tunnels or interconnecting tunnels underground that you found?
There are no tunnels underground that I'm aware of, except I do know, and this is a part of the research that we've done for the book that's actually really raw. There hasn't been a lot of people write about it. They were making extensive use of caves for about 1,500 years. And the reason that this is lesser known is that archaeologists are very uncomfortable writing about the cave activities because a lot of the remains found in the caves demonstrate evidence of what could have been sacrificial activities. And so struggling with a way to really define this aspect of the culture, it's usually not featured in most major studies on the mound builders. But we do know now that the Adena were making ceremonial use of caves. So I suppose that would be a type of a tunnel.
Mm-hmm. Right. It always makes you wonder after they, when they transfer out or when they leave, it makes you wonder where their spirits are. And if their spirits revisit the areas. Did you ever get a vibration or feel some kind of an essence of this?
You know, that's really not my area of expertise, but I do know of a couple of people that are really into researching the paranormal and the supernatural. And I've actually spoken or been in contact with a couple of these individuals, and all that I did was ask them, you know, I would choose a specific location here in West Virginia, and I would say, have you ever heard of any supernatural activity in this location or this neighborhood or even at this specific house? And I would say probably at least half the time, if there had been an Adena mound there, which the landowners may not have even known about at some point in history, there is some type of record of what some people interpret as paranormal activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense, or at least a vibrational signature of some kind. It would seem like it anyway.
Well, these were also ceremonial sites.
Mm-hmm.
Everything in this culture was done with an overlay of religion. And one of the reasons for this, we believe, is that globally, at one time, there were specific people who may have traveled extensive distance around the earth who created a type of political system that was hidden within a spiritual system. In other words, everything was done ceremonially to add an element of the sacred to the socioeconomic process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like they still do that today.
I believe they do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Do you have any comment there, Marcia?
Well, you know, as an artist, that is coming through me every minute of the day. So,
right.
When you strip away, when you live in an area and you strip away the architecture and you strip away the people and you're focused on the land that you're on, you definitely will feel a vibration from the past. Absolutely. That's my belief anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you on that one as well. I would almost wonder if there's a haunting presence to some degree. I was going to ask also, there's another question here, Jason, about the similarities pertaining to mounds and henges at Stonehenge and Marietta's Conus Mound.
Well, there's actually, it goes further than Western Europe. The earthworks in question are typically referred to in Adena studies as sacred circles. And these sacred circles usually consist of an outer bank of earth and an interior ditch in the shape of a circle with a causeway that leads into the circle. And these have been traditionally interpreted as ceremonial sites. And to give you an idea of how many they would build in one place, at Charleston there were 50 burial mounds and 10 of these enclosures just in this one area. And they covered the entire Ohio River Valley with these enclosures, and they're very similar to the circular shell middens where in Marcia's neck of the woods. And these Adena enclosures are identical to what in European archaeology is referred to as a Class 1 hinge, which is the same structure with one entryway. But this type of monumental construction actually appears in several forms, going all the way back to 5,000 or 6,000 BC. It is a very ancient form of construction, and it is almost always associated with ceremonialism or with gathering places for political or tribal reasons. Now, in terms of Stonehenge, the question is probably directed to several images that we put in a recent article for Ancient American, issue 109, which showed what's called a bell barrow from near Stonehenge. And a bell barrow is a burial mound that is surrounded by one of these enclosures with a central causewayed entrance. And a perfect example of this type of burial mound is at Marietta, Ohio. It's still intact today, and it's referred to as the Conus Mound. And it has many multiple hundreds of identical twins in Western Europe.
That's fascinating. This is quite interesting right there. And, you know, this is flying by, this 1 hour. So obviously we're going to redo this another time, too, at some point in the continuum, maybe on Hyperspace when I resurrect that on PSN Radio. But let's go ahead and talk about what you want to talk about the next 7 minutes here. I want you all to have the floor. And Marcia, just chime in when you want to. And Jason, so whatever you feel guided to talk about, I'd like to kind of give you, just give you the floor to talk insofar as what you want to cover. Anything important that you'd like to address?
Well, go ahead, Jason.
Well, I just want to talk about what Marcia said earlier about something that could unite our people. Mm-hmm. The reason that people respond to the concept of ancient giants is that these beings are in the genetic memory of the entire human race. And the reason they're in our genetic memory is because all of us, at a certain point in history, have encountered these beings. Our ancestors encountered these beings, and their ancestors encountered these beings, and they had a powerful impact on world history, which we intend to document in the book. And in fact, it may be that they shaped prehistory because they had a powerful influence on the earliest civilized races of humans. And as a species, we cannot hope to begin to change and alter the future of this world in a positive course until we know where we came from. It is vitally essential that we rediscover who we are, where we came from, and what we can do to change the course. And that's really the inspiration behind the work that the three of us are doing.
Mm-hmm. And I love your work, by the way, Jason. You're phenomenal. And what a pleasure it is, Marcia, to meet with you tonight and connect with you. And once again, like I said, I'd like to have you both back again to discuss this, and probably on Hyperspace earlier hours, so you're not so staying up so late, right? But Marcia, do you have anything to add to that? That was brilliant, Jason. Well said.
Yeah, that was well said, Jason. I don't. You see everything that I do. I'm a visual person, so definitely people just visit my website. I will constantly add more images to that site and see what these skulls look like reconstructed. Keep your mind open to the possibility of how they might have appeared and how that fits into where we are now. Learn about your history. So that's all I have to say. Just keep watching. I think Jason's book, when it comes out, will speak for itself as well.
Absolutely. And when's that coming out, Jason?
Well, we don't have a publication date yet, but we do have a publisher, and it's going to be early in this coming year, and I'll be sure to let you know immediately when we have a date.
You better, because I want to hear about this book. I want to read it, and of course we're going to be promoting it and talking about it, and I can't wait. And once again, it's an honor to have both of you on, Jason and Marcia. What a pleasure it is. Marcia, before we, I know we're going to run out of time here in the Illusion, we're going to hit a break, but have you done forensic reconstructions for any detective agencies at all?
No, I have not. I am a traditional artist. I am one that has studied anatomy, and I can visually recreate this. I have looked at a lot of forensic work to get an idea of what they're doing. But honestly, if you look at a skull, and if you're an artist and you know anatomy, you can build up a skull. It is an interpretation, but for the most part, I think it gets the point across.
Mm-hmm. You certainly have a gift.
Well,
thank you.
It must be a good interpretation, because National Geographic in Poland picked up the Adena.
Nice.
That's right.
That's impressive.
The visuals have definitely made the rounds, so it's good. It's a good thing.
Well, I think that's awesome. Yeah, I encourage everybody to check it out. Once again, how does everybody get in touch with either one of you?
Well, myself, you can go to my Facebook page. My name is Marcia K Moore, MarciaK Moore, Moore, and also my website, marciakmoore.com. So that's where you can find me.
Perfect. And Jason?
Well, our website is alleghanymounds.com, and you can also find me on Facebook.
That's right. We certainly can. And how did you all meet?
Well, that's a great story. When Sarah and I submitted our first article to Ancient Origins for publication, they contacted Marcia to request use of one of her reconstructions, and it formed a partnership that has continued ever since.
That's awesome. Well, that being said, we're out of time here. Thank you so much, Jason and Marcia. It's been a pleasure to have you on. Have a wonderful new year and safe new year. We'll be in touch.